Hi, welcome to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. If you have been listening to various episodes here, you know I focus a lot around agility and frameworks. Why? Well, this podcast is centered around helping you refine those skills that help you do your work in tech. And a lot of those skills are based around using agile ways of working. Today, I speak with an expert in one of those frameworks called SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, quite popular if you work in the US government. His name is Richard Knaster, and he has more than 30 years of experience in software and systems development, in roles ranging from developer to executive. He is also the co author of the Safety Steel book series. While we did talk about this framework, the focus on lessons for us today is about becoming a new kind of leader or manager, where you focus on the big picture, on value, and on connecting the dots. Listen to this episode and remember to visit my website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, to subscribe to my newsletter and find out how to get in touch with me for coaching and consulting services. Now, let's listen. Welcome, Richard, to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Yadi, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
I'm very excited because right now I have a lot of questions. I've been featuring here a lot of experts on agile and also on either change management. We featured John Cotter in an episode, featuring other experts in terms of the areas of management. So I'm very interested in talking with you about lean management. SAFe, of course, one of the methods for one of the agile frameworks, which I'm using right now, actually. So I have a lot of questions to ask you. So, but first of all, in terms of the all the questions that I have for you today, what are some of the what made you focus on the area on your work that you do today?
Yeah, so how did I get started on my career?
Yes.
So, well, when I was in college, I had looked at the different fields that were available, and I was excited about the rate of change that was happening in our technology industry. So I thought this is a place where I wanted to be. It also seemed to require continuous learning. And I love learning something new and sharing my learning with others. So that's how I kind of got started. But as my career progressed, and I was in many different roles, from business analyst to chief agile methodologist at IBM, to working for Scaled Agile on the framework team as a methodologist, and more. What I always found was I was never satisfied with how our projects went. No matter how hard I tried, almost always our project was late, didn't include the scope that the stakeholders wanted, or didn't really return the value that we wanted. And I always knew there had to be a better way of doing things. So I'm going back a long time now, but even 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I would always change how the processes were for implementing projects. And I learned how to do things in parallel, how to do single piece flow, just things that just naturally came to me as a project manager, as a business analyst, and then later as an executive. Having that hands-on experience was really important. And it was very frustrating to me that there was something with the model that was broken. And then when I discovered iterative and agile, I was like over the moon. Okay, this is why we're not successful, because the model itself is broken.
And when you discover agile, what is it that appealed to you from agile frameworks or the agile methodologies? Were you attached to a particular methodology, and what is it that attracted you to agile?
Yeah, so I wasn't necessarily attracted to any one framework like Scrum or XP or Kanban. I just thought the general way that Agile works was something that really made sense to me based upon being in traditional project management where the model doesn't work. So one of the things that I liked about Agile was its flexibility, its adaptability, and conducting small experiments to see if something works before committing to larger scope. And I used to write a lot of business cases back in the day, and I always kid uh, my learners in my class that I'm one of the greatest fiction writers of all time. And they would say, "Why is that?" Well, I've written many business cases, many, many. And when I look back at those business cases, I realized that they were full of speculative assumptions that were never questioned. And
Hmm.
I was always able to get a business case approved just having a good spreadsheet with a 5-year ROI, net present value, and some, what I thought were good assumptions. And it was never checked. And I know that a lot of things that we did weren't as valuable as they should have been, and we always built too much. So that model was definitely broken, and that's what really attracted me to Agile. Is let's try small experiments and see if they work, and then let's decide where to go from there. Don't assume that we can define the requirements or what product we need up front. In fact, solving problems is one of my favorite things to do. Even complex problems, the more complex it is, the more fun that I think it is. And finding ways how to solve those problems is what gets me up in the morning. And I'm just a natural problem solver. I like to take actions. I like to get thoughts from a lot of people and have the teams propose to me what they think is the best solutions, and then try those different things and give people the autonomy and the support they need to get things done. I always found that to be the most satisfaction.
That's wonderful. I like when you mention in terms of business cases as fiction stories, all the possibilities, but it ends up going that so many ways that are not written in in that. Um, and you ended up with Safe in terms of being an authority on it because you have written various books about how to apply the methodology, the effective use in organizations. So why Safe?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I was working for IBM at the time, and I was working with Scott Embler and Mark Lines, and they were, uh, working on Discipline Agile at the time. And so I did some contribution to that, and I thought that the framework and method, they had a lot of great knowledge in there, but what I thought was it was a bit too complicated because you had to make many choices when you're using Discipline Agile. And so I thought maybe it's not going to be so easy to implement because people have to have the knowledge of what is the best thing to do in their case. And many times people just want to know, what should I do? And then after they've been doing things for a while, then they can figure out how to tailor it to their particular context. So I took a course when I was at IBM, on SAFE, and I just loved it. And I happened to, in the course, we used to have an open space time, and I did a presentation on Discipline Agile and how it differed from SAFE in the 6 hours that I had learned SAFE. And Drew Gemolo, who is one of the co-founders of Scaled Agile, and Alex Shakima listened to my talk, and I spoke to them and said, I love this stuff. I'd love to get involved in this. And they said, well, would you be interested in working at Scaled Agile? And, I said, absolutely. And then I reached out to Dean on Skype and I asked him, is this a good time uh, to do consulting? And I said, I'm thinking of moving on from IBM, looking for something new. And he said, well, why don't you join Scaled Agile? And I was like flabbergasted, and I was so honored by that. And we interviewed and met at Agile 2013, and then I joined the company. So it was quite great, and it just really hit home to me. It made sense. The work items that Safe uses, the main vehicle for value are features, and measuring how well we're doing on the features, progress based upon actually working solutions, working software, instead of saying, okay, we're 90% complete on our project. And what I always found is if you go to a developer and ask them, where are you at on this task? Almost always they'll say they're about 90% complete. And then you go back to next week and I would ask them, where are you at? What percent complete? And I could see they were just rolling their eyes and making up a number. Oh, we're 93% complete. Then I learned a better question. How much more time do you think you need to finish this feature? Oh, about 3 months. So now I finally got at the truth by asking the right question. Not that they were hiding the truth from me, but we were measuring progress based upon task completion instead of working software. And so that's one of the things I love about the agile frameworks as well, is that
Mhm.
we're really measuring objective measures of progress.
Yeah, and in terms of SAFe, because SAFe is a method for those in listening that if they're not familiar with it, it's a different agile framework, and it does involve various like it's what we call ceremonies, like events. It involves planning, not just for like a small sprint in terms of the 2 week planned work that you have a short term, but also planning iterations of like the quarterly iterations. So and different roles, like having like you have your scrum masters, you have also your release train engineers, the concept of agile trains. How would you explain in terms of what SAFe is and what distinguishes from it from other frameworks that we may be familiar with?
Yeah, so SAFe is both a knowledge base of proven patterns for implementing agility at scale. And when I say at scale, if you have multiple teams, 3, 4, 5 teams, how do you manage the work across those teams? How do you deal with dependencies? How do you eliminate dependencies? How do you help work flow as fast as possible so that we can get value into the hands of our customers? So I like to think of it as both a knowledge base and as a library of patterns for how to implement agility. That's how I think of it.
And oh yeah, in general, also there are some. What do you think are some misconceptions of the framework? Because, for example, in the agile community, at times they may say like, "Oh, SAFe is too complex," or in terms of the multiple roles, or perhaps its applicability in organizations. So, I want to understand, based on your experience, from your perspective, what are some of the misconceptions about this particular framework?
Yes, and so I think the number one misconception is SAFe is not agile. People look at the big picture, and that represents a model of the framework, and it's also the user interface that you navigate to different articles on the framework. So if you see the Agile Release Train on the big picture, if you click on the Agile Release Train icon, it brings you to an article about the Agile Release Train. And so the big picture is quite crowded. There's a lot of information on it. And therefore, some people look at it and say, oh, that can't be Agile. Look how complicated that is. Well, when you're implementing Agile at scale in a large organization or with large teams, and you're building everything from software all the way to perhaps a fighter jet or an aircraft carrier or really anything, you need more guidance on how to manage multiple teams where you may have hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of engineers, software and hardware and others to bring that new product or solution to market. And so it requires a lot of things. But at its essence, SAFe isn't really that complicated, and there is a configuration called Essential SAFe. And that configuration, in terms of events, it just has three main events. And that one of them is called PI planning. And that's where multiple teams come together to get alignment on what they're going to be doing for the next quarter at a high level. And then there's the inspect and adapt at the end of a PI, a planning interval, which lasts anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks. And the company chooses the cadence, and then you stick with it. Maybe once in a while adapting its length. And then we have, after the inspect and adapt, we have system demos that occur during the PI. So each planning interval, there is a PI at the end of the iteration where we're integrating the code, the solution, continuously uh, doing builds, doing testing. And so we're getting feedback throughout the entire planning interval, or what we just say in PI. So really, those are the three main events. And if you're using Scrum, the team would also have team level events, such as iteration planning, and which is the same thing as sprint planning. We use the word iteration in SAFe to keep it generic because the teams can choose whatever methods they feel are best for them. It could be Scrum, it could be Kanban, it can be XP, or more likely, it's a combination of each of the practices from those different frameworks. And there's only 3 additional roles that there are in SAFe for an agile release train, which is a release train engineer, product management, and system architect. So I know people think it's complex, but when you look at the big picture, you understand how to read it. It's actually quite simple. And if you go to the essential configuration, people will find that it's a lot less scary looking at that picture because it's looking at what are the things that you need the most.
Mm.
The other thing is, it talks about principles and values. It has an implementation roadmap. So there's a lot of things to support people on their agile journey, and people, need more guidance than what was say just in a Scrum guide or what's in the Kanban guide. They need a little bit more prescription. And what we suggest to people is that they begin with the simple stuff and then they can incrementally implement other things as needed. So that's the other misconception, is that agile requires a big bang transformation and that you have to disrupt the entire organization
Mm-hmm.
and you have to train everyone in SAFe, which is simply not true. The journey that you take is yours to decide, and SAFe gives you some patterns that have worked in terms of implementing SAFe, and we suggest in the framework that you start with an agile release train and then start on the next train, and so on and so on. And so you can do it incrementally, uh, as an example. The other big misconception is that SAFe eliminates traditional managers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the farthest thing from the truth. And while SAFe does have new agile roles, it doesn't eliminate the need for effective leadership and management. And often managers might transition to new SAFe roles, whether it's at the essential level with being a product manager or a system architect or release train engineer, even a business owner. They can also take team roles. Many times people in management, they were promoted because they were so good at their job, but they didn't really like being managers. So it's also an opportunity to get people who want to continue on a technical path to continue down that road. And if you want to hear a few others, I can also mention those too. What I think
Yeah.
is, yeah. So another one is that SAFe is only for large enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used SAFe in an organization that only had like 25 engineers, and they were both software and hardware. This was for medical devices. And they realized that I think they had about 5 teams, and they didn't know how to coordinate those teams, even in a very small startup. And
Mm-hmm.
so I helped them implement SAFe on a very small scale. And even with 25 people, it worked quite well. And even with just 25 to 30 people, even the portfolio level, where you make investment decisions, what are the big things that we're going to work on, helps tremendously. The entire system needs to be agile to work. You just can't make the teams agile but not change the way management works or the way you do business cases
Mm-hmm.
or the way work is flowing. You really have to, change the entire system. So that's, I think, another big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my, in summary, when we talk about misconceptions,
Yeah.
it's just about scaling agile, and people assume it's rigid and prescriptive, that there's a big bang transformation, believing it eliminates managers,
Mm-hmm.
and it only applies to large enterprises. So what's really important is that leaders need to take leading safe or other courses. They can become an SPC as well to learn how the framework operates so that they can remove impediments for operating in a truly agile manner.
What's an SPC?
That's a safe practice consultant.
Okay. And you touch upon a few things, various things that, in terms of for organizations and for the people that are will be part of any particular change. And I want to get into that because you mentioned values. And even let's say if, for example, in an organization everybody's trained on safe or any other framework, that doesn't make them, agile. That doesn't make them to start acting out. So there's a particular skill set aside from managing technical projects or ensuring that technical products get into market. There's a part of the soft skills part that I want to talk about. So, what are some of the required skills or the quote unquote soft skills or values that people in their organization need to have in order to be receptive to make a transformation?
Yeah, so I would, from my experience, not many leaders have had the opportunity to do a transformation in their organization. And I have a lot of empathy for leaders because they have to do their day job, so to speak, and they also have to do the transformation. And both are equally important. And so that they have to be able to be actively engaged in the transformation, having a bias for action. So when problems arise, they need to be able to deal with those problems right away. And so people see, there's a change that's going on here. We identified these problems, and leadership immediately jumped on the problem and they solved those problems. And I can remember, as an example, I had some project managers come to me after we had done some training in SAFE, and they said to me, Richard, I'm really worried. I'm saying, what's your concern? We still need your skills as a project manager, but project management is done another way. And they said, well, one of the things I'm worried about is compensation. And I used to manage projects that had millions of dollars and hundreds of people on it. And now I may just be leading one team as part of a larger team of teams. And so I said, well, that's certainly a valid concern. I really haven't seen where people's salaries have gone down as a result of implementing Agile. But let's get your CIO and let's get somebody from HR, and we'll have a conversation with them and see what we can do about this. And the great thing was, we were at our first PI planning event, and that leader grabbed somebody from HR. We had a quick huddle with them, with that person who raised the issue. And then the leader, after speaking with myself and the person who raised the concern and human resources, said, figured, okay, I know what we're going to do. And that leader addressed that issue right away and said that there will be no penalties, or reduction in compensation, including bonus, because you may be working in a different role where perhaps you're not managing people, but it's self-managing and self-organizing, and there is a career path for you. So let's get that out of the way. That is not going to be a problem, and we'll give you more details after the first PI planning. And we did that towards the end of the PI and addressed those concerns. So it was immediate response, and people really saw the difference.
Yeah, so you're referring in terms of the kind of changes in terms of conditions, like that empathy from the leader, in terms of understanding like the is a change in the environment, or the way they do things, and the results from that in terms of compensation. In terms of the I know in your books you talk about a couple concepts in terms of the traditional leadership versus lean leadership. How could you distinguish that? What's a lean leader?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that makes a lean leader different than a traditional manager is that often managers are managing people from their office. And one of the big things in lean is going to the Gemba, going to where work happens. So a lean leader walks around or periodically meets with people to find out what is really happening, what is working, what is not working, and how can we make things better. Traditional managers often don't want to hear bad news, and people often get punished as the messenger or if you've made a mistake. By its definition, a lean leader wants to hear about these problems and they want to have a bias for action and solve those problems. Now, lean has a um, roots in manufacturing, where and particularly the Toyota production system, where if there was a problem in the Toyota factory in Japan, people could pull an andon cord and stop the line because there's a problem and it needs to be fixed right away. And they would solve that problem before that problem went downstream and then just kept snowballing with more and more problems. So it's that mindset from lean that we're gonna fix things right away, and we're not gonna let them fester. We're not gonna let them go downstream, so that we have more and more work to fix downstream. So I think that's a big difference. They want to eliminate waste. They are concerned with flow. They are concerned with providing value. Another thing I think that lean leaders will do, especially this has been, I think, pretty big in the scaled agile framework, is the idea of organizing teams around value. The biggest thing that you want to do in lean is to deliver the most amount of value in the shortest sustainable lead time with the highest possible quality. So that's the mindset that lean thinking managers need to have. And as I mentioned earlier, having a problem solving approach, where they see problems and then these leaders get the right people together to tackle those problems using things like an Ishikawa diagram, a fishbone diagram, and the five
Mm-hmm.
whys to get to the root causes and not just simply fix the symptoms, because the problems will keep coming back and then back and then back, and it's really frustrating for people. Lean lean leaders use systems thinking as well. They think about the entire system end to end, not just, and if you fix just a part of the system, it may break other parts of the system. So you need to think about the whole, not just the parts. And lean thinking leaders also have a continuous improvement mindset. We call it relentless improvement and safe. And that also comes from Toyota's thinking that we're always improving the process, we're always improving the product, and that we have an enormous focus or massive focus on customer centricity and design thinking as well.
That's great because you touch a lot upon a various important concepts, aspects of continuous improvement, systems thinking, thinking about the repercussions across the board, being ready to solve particular problems. How about design thinking? Could you explain a little bit about design thinking?
Yes, so design thinking is one of the tools that you can use to help achieve customer centricity. And typically in design thinking, there are two large processes. One is to understand the problem, And then after you understand the problem is to design the right solution. And one of the sayings when it comes to design thinking is to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And we really have to understand what exactly is the problem before we start jumping into design. And in most companies that I visit, organizations are ready right to jump into this design. They hear something from a customer and they're giving people the answer to how to design the right solution to solve that problem when people really have not explored the problem space to really discover and define what the problem is about, and then to go ahead and design the right solution. If you go right into the solution space, you get enamored with a solution. I just created the best solution in the world, and you don't want to change it because you've kind of fell in love with that solution. The better thing is to really empathize with the customers about the problem and then work with them and others in your organization to design a proper solution to solve that problem, because that's what software development and hardware development and other product development is all about. Solving customer problems. We're just not coming up with these outrageous ideas that is a solution looking for a problem. You're not going to win in the marketplace that way.
That's great. I love that about falling in love with the problem and not the solution. Because yes, I've seen usually in organizations it's the solutions with all the bang, whiz bang, and everything else, and it's like, but what problem is it solving? So great that you mentioned that. Before we go, I have a couple more questions, and since we were talking a lot about the particular SAFE framework, I want to talk about any anti-patterns. Like for example, I've seen in organizations that they are so adhered with following a specific framework to the T, and but not necessarily thinking about delivering value, more along the lines of like tracking every single thing, or tracking the work, tracking the the all all the business or of the team, or perhaps what do you think? Maybe that's a good thing, but I want to understand in terms of what are some of the not to do's or anti patterns from the framework that you've seen have maybe gone too far.
Yeah, and the first one I think is about that you really have to have the buy-in of leadership and having their active engagement and really have a problem in the organization that's worth solving. So there needs to be an urgency, as John Kotter would say, in his 8-step process. And the leaders need to communicate, because otherwise people won't want to change. You also need to communicate what is in it for people. Everyone listens to the radio station WIFM. What's in it for me? So you really need to explain it in terms that what will get people to come along with a leader on that journey. I think a lot of people try to implement SAFE by the book, and they're trying to implement too many aspects of SAFE without really getting the basics down first. Another huge problem is not moving from a project-oriented mindset to a product-oriented mindset. We need to get away from managing projects to creating products and maintaining those products, which is having that longer term view of the solutions that we're developing and looking how we continuously improve it. It's not about, oh, we completed all these tasks or task orders if you're in the government. It's about providing value to the customers and providing value to the organization. And people often lose sight of that's what you're trying to do, is to provide that value. And a lot of times the wrong things are being worked on and they don't really move the needle in the business. So maybe 50% or 60% of the capacity that organizations have is spent on things that are really not going to make a difference to the organization. So I think that's some of the things. People not really understanding the lean agile mindset, resistance to change, and having a lack of understanding of the agile values and principles. So before you jump into an agile transformation, you really need to understand what does it mean to be lean and agile, and leaders need to practice being agile. So one of the things that I love doing is implementing lean portfolio management, often first before we implement agile at the teams. And one of the reasons why we would do that is because I want to get the leaders to act as an agile team. And we're implementing SAFe using SAFe, which of course is consist of lean and agile practices. And therefore, they don't leaders don't code most of the time. They're not doing testing. They're not necessarily speaking to customers in detail. So they need to know what it's like to be on an agile team and get why we're doing things in a different way. And then they'll do everything they can to support it. But if they don't really know how it works, you often get leaders who seem to be saying one thing from one side of the mouth and doing another thing on the other side of the mouth. And that's because they just simply don't understand yet. So I'm a big believer in habits. And so we need to build these habits for both teams and leaders.
That is wonderful advice. Thank you so much for all your advice and information, Richard. And what's the best way for people to contact you if they have questions?
Yeah, so I always welcome people reaching out to me. And the best way to get a hold of me probably is through LinkedIn. Just send me a message, and I will be happy to interact with people, and I will try to get back to them as soon as I can. They can also take courses from me. I usually teach a safe practice consultant course every month and a lean portfolio management quarterly, and I also do consulting. So I love helping organizations transform and being great places to work, where you want to get up in the morning and you're excited about doing what you're doing. I love working, and I want everyone else to have that feeling, because it really stinks when you get up every day and you're disengaged. And like 66% of the people out there are disengaged, according to SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And that's got to change, because people are really not enjoying their lives. And you can't separate work from home. It's both. There's no work-life balance. It's life. And sometimes you're working, and sometimes you're doing leisure and being with your family. But it's more about, how do you enjoy life, whatever you're doing, whether you're working, whether you're playing, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
Make it a great place to be.
I agree. And that's part of the mission of this podcast, in terms of giving the people the tools and the skills that they need to be able to provide, to have that success in their careers and happiness in their careers. I appreciate so much your time, Richard. So thank you so much for being with me on the podcast today.
Yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. Before you leave, make sure you go to my website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter. Then go to the review tab and leave a review. It is the way to ensure this podcast is discovered by others. Remember that by learning soft skills, you make your hard skills work for you. See you next time.